Mauri ora ki a koutou, assalamu alaikum, shalom. I bring you greetings of profound peace. E aku nui, e aku rahi, tēnā koutou katoa. Kei te reo pōheri, kei te mihi. E te mana whenua, Ngāti whātua, tēnā koutou. E taura tangata, e taura kaupapa, e hono ana i a tātou katoa, ko koutou, ko au, ko tātou. Ko waio, ko matātua te waka, ko tamarau, ke te kōrero, te tangata, ko otunuku, te whenua, ko otunuku te papakainga, ko otunuku te marae, ko Ngāti Kaura, te hapu, ko Tūhoi, te iwi, ko Tracey McIntosh, tōku ingoa. I acknowledge all of us who are here today, and particularly mihi to survivors of terrorist violence and to colonial and neo-colonial violence, wherever that has occurred. As Māori, we recognise our responsibilities as tangata whenua to tangata te tiriti, and our responsibilities to name and to address all forms of violence. Violence has been defined as non-linear, productive, destructive, and reproductive. Violence gives birth to itself. It's this violence that gives birth to itself that we must address at every opportunity, that we must recognise the absolute importance of creating the conditions in this society of a just society. Redress and response to harm must capture the entirety of the context in which something harmful occurs. So in reflecting on preventing and countering violence, we must ensure that we address and seek to redress state, colonial, neo-colonial, legislative, structural, political, economic, cultural, institutional, and collective violence. In this country, Māori must play a leadership role in ensuring that the nuance of everyday racism and extreme forms of racism are collectively understood and responded to. In this session, we draw on the expertise of 3 Māori Rangitira who will lay the foundation of this kaupapa for this 2-day hui from a tiriti perspective. And so I will now call upon our 3 members of this panel to come up, and as they come up, I will introduce them. And they will then, of course, mihi themselves. Tina Ngata is an Indigenous rights activist. She is a writer, a poet, a thought leader, an astonishing wahine tō. Her work involves advocacy for environmental, Indigenous and human rights. This includes national and international initiatives that highlight the role of settler colonialism in issues such as climate change, pollution, and promote Indigenous conservation as good practice for a globally sustainable future. She is an astonishing woman. Te Huia Bill Hamilton, also introducing to the stage, is a member of the Iwi Chairs Forum. He is highly skilled in weaving the Te Tiriti or Waitangi into institutional and collective organisation, and his desire is absolutely incredible in terms of wanting to weave that into the fabric of our nation. He has experience working at local, regional, national and international levels. His work on supporting Rangitiratanga and to relationship building to support community has been across many years. And the last, certainly not least, good friend, Rawiri Taonui. Rawiri is an academic, an intellectual, a commentator, an educator, an independent writer, and advisor on Māori and Indigenous rights and racism. He is particularly unbelievably generous in giving his time to educating the Crown. He is a member of the National Task Force on Anti-Racism. He's a member of Ngā Morihu, the National Task Force for Māori Survivors, also of Te Ara Takatū, the Academic Advisory Group to the National Security 47 Group, and the Welcoming New Cultural Committee's initiatives. for the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the New Zealand Human Rights Commission. So I welcome all of these members to our panel today. We are going to be the first ones to use the app, so please, if you have questions, could you put them up here? I will see those questions and we'll respond to them at the end. We will have, all of our speakers will speak first, and with the time left, we will have questions. Kia koe tina.
Done.
Thank you.
Well done, Tracey.
Tēnei te mihi atu ki a koutou katoa, tautoko o ngā mihi kua mihia. Ki te mana o tēnei whenua, Ngāti whātua, ngā mokopuna āpi hai te kawau, nāna I whakatiriti ai I tēnei whenua. Mai tēnei mokopuna a taurau kukupā, nāna I whakatiriti ai te whenua tūri ohau ki Kaipara I te hainatanga ki Waitangi. Hei ahai, hei aha hoki. Hei tū, a raua mokopuna, I runga I o rātou ake whenua, o mātou ake whenua, hei Rangitira mo ake tonu atu. Nō reira, mai tēnei mokopuna a hikurangi maunga, a waiapu awa, a Ngāti Porou iwi, tēnei te mihi atu ki a koutou katoa. I would like to join the acknowledgements of mana whenua, particularly Ngāti whātua ki o rākei, who have staunchly withstood generations of violence for living on this whenua, coveted by so many, yet still stand here today with their arms open, caring for so many from the four winds on this whenua, Tamaki Makaurau. And to all of the survivors of racist violence gathered here, I acknowledge your stories, your strengths, and most of all, your forbearance. I want to acknowledge that in spite of generations of hurt and injustice, some of which many can never even imagine, you still have enough faith in the human condition to stay involved in these discussions, to hold hope for a better future, and to be a part of the solution, and to even show in the face of such mamai, such amazing qualities as manaakitanga and forgiveness and grace, the kind of which we saw exemplared by Kaitahu also in Ōtautahi in the darkest of days in 2019. It reminds me of one of my very favourite well-known sayings that Matua Te Huia will be aware of, because it was often touted by my mentor and his friend Moana Jackson. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the things that might bring that justice closer to our hands. Because the forces that led us to gather here in this hui were catalysed by the brutality of white identity extremism. And for some in this room, you might see that as an isolated event. Perhaps you see white identity extremism itself as an isolated blight on an otherwise kind, just, and progressive nation. But for those of us who dedicate our lives standing up to colonialism and dedicate our lives to deeply defending and promoting te tiriti and Indigenous and human rights, it is simply the extension of a history of colonial violence. The natural, ultimate endgame of having our lives consistently devalued. The assumption of power to take someone's life and the racist devaluing of their life does not sit separate to the colonial presumption of rights over our lands, our waters, over our bodies, over our lives, and that of our children. For those presumptions are also underpinned by racist ideologies and systems based upon centuries of assumed supremacy. And I know that there is a broad interest here in the role that Te Tiriti a Mātauranga Māori has to play. But for all of the times that I hear people say Te Tiriti, particularly government agencies, if there's one word that seems an anathema to their tongue, it's the word colonialism. Entering into these discussions with an extractive, entitled mindset to draw from people only about what we know, but not how you might contribute to the problem, will just create another layer of harm. We so often hear that addressing colonialism must sit to the side whilst we address every other dimension of a matter, and that perhaps if we give it a Māori name, offer a whakatauki, appoint a Māori advisor and say a karakia at the beginning, that will solve the problem. But the forces that brought us here today are no less than pure, distilled, concentrated colonial entitlement. Colonial violence is not an accessory to this conversation, it is the conversation. Our relationship cannot rest on your desire to draw from us. Our ability to relate to each other must sit at the centre with an honest reckoning, and a tiriti partnership in this space, if it is to have integrity, must start with an understanding of our perspectives. If you could put my slide up, please. For us, extreme colonial violence exists upon a continuum. Within this continuum, yes, you have extremists, you have disinformation merchants, you have online assailants, and you also have centrist powermongers who passively protect and maintain colonial privilege whilst presenting themselves as benign allies. And whilst extremists obviously get the most attention because they're the loudest and the most violent, obviously violent, they generally hold less structural power. And whilst extremists are also few in number, those who passively allow extreme ideas to persist within concepts such as the marketplace of ideas are abundant and collectively extremely harmful. They allow for those racist ideas to become normalised and mainstreamed, and the critical mass of those who allow harmful ideas is growing because of it. And while those extreme views, particularly online assailants, often escape accountability, many others involved in this continuum before you, who are also in this room right now, are absolutely accountable for the power that they hold and how they wield it. It is therefore the responsibility of accountable power to engage humbly in this discussion, not just about us as victims or solution bearers, but also about yourself as a part of the problem. Because you see, none of this is isolated. White supremacist ideology is connected to a global presumption of racialized supremacy that grows extreme violence of all kinds. But importantly, it also includes state-sanctioned police violence. It includes the military force, which ultimately secures colonial domination. It includes hyper-surveillance and hyper-incarceration of non-white peoples. It includes the global movement of peoples and racist border and immigration policies. It includes racialized myth-making in media and in schools. And it also includes, importantly, the dishonouring with impunity of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the very treaty which enables non-Māori to be here, and the maintenance of a power system which grants that impunity. So naturally, when we see the world and the problem of extremism from this perspective, it makes sense, right? That we would be circumspect about the Crown's ability to step into this space with any efficacy when it allows so many contributors to the problem to be maintained. You can see why we would side-eye attempts at change, especially when the hallmarks of that ideology of domination presents itself and the engagements with us when they assume the power to determine the parameters of the conversation, when they set the terms of engagement for all, when they use paternalistic language in those engagements or refuse to share power equitably or define when that engagement starts or stops. And I see many allies who nodding a little bit because we've all played the stop-start game for a few years now. The full scope of white supremacy, from the passive powermongerer to the mass murderer, is transnational. It is economically underpinned, and all of it, even the violent extremities of it, are wealthily bankrolled. If we are to hold out any hope of defeating this deeply complex, entrenched, wicked problem, we will need solidarity between all who reject and repudiate that ideology. And I genuinely do believe that that's most of us, the vast majority of us. But we can't stand in solidarity with each other unless we respect each other's experiences, how those experiences relate to each other, how they inform our interactions, how they inform our relative privilege between each other, so that we can relate from each other's spaces. Our relationships to each other and visions for justice and equity are scribed in documents such as He Whakaputanga, such as Te Tiriti o Waitangi, but also more recently in the form of Matike Mai Aotearoa, which calls for joint entities and co-governance. We have not only outlined the first steps to a just relationship on this whenua, we have shouted it from the rooftops for generations now, and more often than we care to admit, we have been cast as extremists for doing so. The Crown and many other organisations as well have a lot of work to do to get to this point. Some of the most difficult times that I've had working in this space has been at the hands of people who assume the right to take on a Māori name and a Māori logo, but not actually share power equitably with Māori and recognise our Rangitiratanga in this space. You can see that there's a lot of work to do in this space from the fact that we have over 70 recommendations but not one mention of Te Tiriti. Not only are we not centred, we're not present in the recommendations. You can see it from the fact that there is no targeted research on the assaults, online harm and harassment of Māori, in spite of the fact that Māori, wāhine Māori, wāhine maumoko, tāne maumoko are some of the most targeted and harassed people online. And, when we look at Matike Mai, the outcome is going to be obvious for you once you take that journey. It'll take a while because there is a lot of work to do, but you're going to come to the conclusion that I'm about to put before you now. Under Matike Mai and under Te Tiriti, Māori deserve an independent body to monitor counter-terrorism, to monitor threats towards Te Ao Māori at an individual, organisational and community level. The work ahead of you, and I'm saying you can do that now and do the work. The work ahead of you will involve sitting with and reckoning with deep, necessary discomfort. But I have seen it work, and I believe it's here. This is a part of the belief. If anybody has demonstrated to us the right to believe and the necessity of hope, it's those who have been through this pain for generations, for centuries, and particularly the deep pain of the last years, but we can still come through it. Now that demonstrates to us that we have a duty to those people to keep working at this. If we want to draw that long moral arc of the universe closer to our grasp, then this is the work that needs to be done, and it can't be put to the side any longer. And in any case, the age of colonial domination is drawing to an end because it has consumed itself. That is what we are seeing happening in front of us. What we have now in our hands is the opportunity to determine if that end will be guided and transitional or painful and messy. And we're here and ready for that conversation and work. And the only question remains is, are you? Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora tātou katoa, tūtahi tēnei te mihi atu ki a koutou te mana whenue, hei pōwhiri mai e mātou. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Tuarua, tautoko ngā mihi ki ngā kaiwhakahaere o tēnei o tātou nei hui. And one of the observations I want to make in tribute to the organisers is that from when I arrived last night and to today, it felt that being Māori, that I was actually welcome here. And so I want to mihi to the organisers for just the way you've organised the hui, and particularly for the ceremonial stuff last night, the addresses where Te Reo Māori and the aroha and the manaaki was on show. And then this morning with the mana whenua opening in a very, very strong way. And I loved what they say in that one pager in the booklet about manaaki and pono and tika and stuff like that. And then also for the way our side responded in that. And then to have this session first is at the beginning of the business part of the conference as a tribute to your leadership. So, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. I was brought up on a saying that there's nothing so unequal as the equal treatment of unequals. And I think that when you start allocating time for Māori to speak, you have to give us an extra 5 minutes because it takes us 5 minutes to say hello. Anyway, so I just want to go through some of the stuff that I've thought about over the last few years to do with te tiriti and to attach it to terrorism and extreme violence. But we can't begin any discussion about te tiriti without remembering the work that Moana Jackson has done in this area. And he passed away at the end of March, and he always used to meet with us on the 28th of October, 3 days ago, to talk about the declaration on he whakaputanga. And we've just had a gathering at Waiwhetu Marae to remember Moana Jackson, and I just want to pay tribute to the incredible work that Moana did to help us really understand that the treaty, te tiriti, belongs to all of us. Te tiriti belongs to all of us. Can I hear you say that? Te tiriti belongs to all of us. Again, te tiriti belongs to all of us. Now, the first bit of work you can do with your app is to send Tracey a question to explain what that means, okay? Anyway, so I want to really just go through just some quick ideas about the promise of te tiriti, what happened and its impact, revitalising. I want to focus a bit on Rangitiratanga and also equality and discrimination, and to have a look at relationships. So I just make it really, really clear that the parties to the treaty are tangata whenua, who are represented by their Rangitira, and tauiwi, who are represented by the Crown. We were brought up to say that the treaty was an agreement between the Crown and Māori, but by saying it like that doesn't actually talk about the proper relationships. And the other thing is that in 1840, the tauiwi were the British people, but we're not that anymore. You know, in 2022, we're not all British subjects or ex-British subjects. We're such a diverse range of tauiwi. Tauiwi means, is the term I refer to that as landed or landing people. So it doesn't just mean Pākehā New Zealanders or British New Zealanders. And I think one of the important things about the Te Tiriti is that it's a promise of all peoples to take the best possible care of each other. And that's a quote from Manu Bennett, who was one of the first tribunal members, and he said that when making a decision on one of the tribunal claims. By the way, I'm happy for these slides to be circulated, so you don't have to take notes, and if you just ask the Secretariat for copies, then I'm happy for you to have them. So what the treaty promised very, very succinctly is it promised the protection of tino Rangitiratanga. It also promised equality and non-discrimination, and it also created a relationship based on rangatiratanga and kāwanatanga. And some terrorist acts happened to us. We had invasions at Parihaka, Tūhoi, and other places. Our leaders were demonised and have been demonised for the last 182 years. And we suffered, our grandparents, they were beaten when they were kids, when they were small kids. They were beaten by the state for speaking their language. Would you allow that to happen to your children today? No, of course you wouldn't. And our children were taken, and they continue to be taken by places like Orangatamariki. And those are violent acts and terrorist acts on our people. In fact, those are some of the sorts of things that Tina referred to in her kōrero. So the impact of that was Rangitiratanga was destroyed or was diminished considerably. Systemic inequalities, discrimination and racism were put on our people, and the relationship we had, which was supposed to be a proper relationship, became a relationship of dominance. And it's really important, that question, so what needs to happen to right the waka? And this is where we're all in this together. We're all in this together, because those acts of terrorism that I've talked about for our people, they've happened to many of your families as well. And the treaty has got some remedies for it. The only thing is that I'm really, really concerned at the moment in the way that government is backing off some Māori solutions, that because they're getting too much pressure from people like Don Brash and David Seymour and Muriel Newman and other right-wing extremists, and that they're letting the waka be righted by them. They're losing their courage. And we need to encourage this government to keep working with us to find solutions based on rangatiratanga and working together in the values. So just want to go quickly through rangatiratanga, just some ideas about it. And I want to particularly talk about those values about aroha, kotahitanga, whanaungatanga, manaakitanga. You know, perhaps we as Māori, we're making the wrong relationships. We're working really, really hard to build relationships with the Crown, but they don't have those values. Most of your families do. And perhaps we would be better off forming relationships with your families, with your communities, and with your leaders. At least we'll start from some common ground. So just a wee bit of talk about what rangatiratanga is, because people get scared of that. They get scared of mana motuhake and rangatiratanga, but it's just really, in human rights terms, it's a right of self-determination, of self-government, to maintain and strengthen our institutions and our representation. It doesn't take away our right to participate fully in the state, and one of the measures for it is about free, prior and informed consent. But the other thing about self-determination is we all have it. It is a universal right. Every family, every community, every person has the right to be self-determining. It is not scary for governments. There's some Māori terms that apply to rangatiratanga, those issues of mana motuhake, mana taketake, mana tō rangapu, mana i te whenua, which is the reference to tino rangatiratanga in the Declaration of Independence, 1835, and tino rangatiratanga, of course, is the reference to Rangitiratanga and Te Tiriti. I think there are some really important things that we can think about in ways we can support the revitalisation of Rangitiratanga, and they're about this here. So learn about Rangitiratanga and Manamometer hake. Just learn what it means and understand it so you can understand how it works, and respect it by making sure it's included in your policies, legislation, practices, bylaws, all of that sort of stuff. Build capacity and capability to engage with Rangitiratanga. And the most important thing is enable it by providing resources, which includes systems, data, information, knowledge, those types of things. The other point I want to just really touch on is about this point here about removing inequality, discrimination and racism. And many of you in this room here, these things would apply. And just there's a project going on with government at the moment, and the point is that we've had community conversations, and there's not really much difference between what happens in the diverse range of communities that express that experience racism. There's just so many common themes. New Zealand's got its own sort of characteristic of racism. It's subtle, it's sneaky, it's underhand, whereas in Australia they're pretty open and blunt about it. The thing is that everywhere it comes out, we have to deal with institutional racism, and that's a point that Tina made. And we have to start having conversations with each other. You know, when I said the treaty belongs to all of us, tangata whenua haven't had a conversation with the Muslim community, with the Islamic leaders, with the leaders from the Indian community, or from the Jewish communities. We haven't had those conversations, or even with our Pacifica cousins, on how the treaty belongs to all of us. And we need to have those conversations. We need to have them at a national level. We need to have them at a local level. Have the conversations. And the other part about it is we don't want the words about equal opportunities. We want equal outcomes. That's where it'll make a difference. Strengthen Rangitiratanga. So we have to strengthen the relationships between Rangatira and the Crown, and also Rangatira and other Taonui leaders. And there's a levels of engagement approach to doing it. And I just want to talk about just some ideas I have about relationships. So I've got 4 scenarios there where we've got a relationship that's about independence. So Party A does what Party A does, and Party B does what Party B does. And they may meet, they may not, but it doesn't matter. They're just happy in their own spaces. We've got that other one there, which is it's a directive relationship, where Party A tells Party B what to do. I always call that the state sector relationship, where Maori advisors are employed by agencies and they can stay in there and they give advice, but it's got to be the advice that's acceptable to what the agency wants to hear, not really what it needs to hear. And then that third one on that cooperative one, where we find areas where we can work together, but we actually don't have too much to do. I refer to that as a date. And that last one there is really about a relationship where we work on things in common, but we support each other in the areas of difference as well. And that's a sustainable relationship. I want to talk very much about, while it's good to talk about these relationships, they actually don't, it's not easy to make them happen. And this is one of the reasons. When we have a look at a kāwanatanga model for decision making, it's very hierarchical. So nothing happens unless the Prime Minister says it'll happen. And then Cabinet says, and then Government says, and then Parliament says, and then lobbyists say, and then every 3 years or so the people have a bit of a say. But the point about it is very hierarchical. Someone tells you what to do, you tell somebody else what to do, you tell somebody else what to do, or you get told what to do, you get told what to do, you get told what to do. So it goes in that way. Māori Rangitiratanga decision making is much simpler. Everyone's the boss. Ngā Puhi's the boss, Ngāti Paro's the boss, Ngā Rauri's the boss. So you won't find, and so they mind their own business. So You won't find, ngā puhi telling ngā rauru what to do, or you won't find Taonui telling Ngāti Porou what to do, or you won't find Ngāti Kahu. Actually, Ngāti Karahungunu tells everybody what to do. I've got to say that. I'm from Ngāti Karahungunu, by the way. And then those two bottom ones really talk about hapu rangatiratanga and the rangatiratanga of marae and whānau. And every now and again, there's an attempt to put a big circle around that to have a collective view. And at the present moment, that big collective circle is the National Iwi Chairs Forum, where 78 or so iwi get together and try and do the kōtahitanga thing. But the point I want to make about it is that when you're trying to talk about a partnership, you're talking about 182 years of colonial, hierarchical, decision-making behaviour, trying to meet with something like that, where people want to stay in their own area and mind their own business. And when you're trying to talk about bringing those two things together, you've got this side wanting to either be the boss or to be bossed around, and this side saying, no, that's your business, not our business. And it's not easy to form a partnership, certainly not an equal partnership. And this is sort of what we're talking about. I've designed this thing called a Manamometer, which explains a wee bit about how these things could work. So on the right-hand side, we have colonisation, where the Crown makes all the decisions for Māori, and on the left-hand side, we have the Rangitiratanga, where Māori make decisions for themselves, and somewhere in the middle, there's a partnership thing going on there. And I think this is always good to measure, who's making the decisions about things, and the other point about it that Tina made is what resources follow the decision-making. So it's not all that bad, really, people. There are solutions. First of all, we need to acknowledge the terrorism the state has inflicted on whānau, not just our whānau, but your whānau as well. And the state needs to apologise for it. And then putting a bit of resource into revitalising rangatiratanga, the ability to make decisions, because one of the elements of rangatiratanga, Moana Jackson told me that rangatiratanga doesn't work unless it promotes manaaki and aroha and whanaungatanga. And one of our responsibilities, if we're exercising rangatiratanga in our rohe, is to show aroha and manaaki and whanaungatanga. So it benefits everybody. The other thing is remove the inequalities and discrimination and strengthen the relationship. I'll just put this song up here because I think it's a really, really good human rights song. It was written after the war by Wihuata, and part of the moral rearmament of trying to get people together after the war. And it says, "Tu tira mai ngā iwi, tātou tātou e," which is stand all people, all of us. "Whai a te māramatanga, seek enlightenment, me te aroha, and love. Kia tapatahi," and I've loosely translated that to mean value diversity. "Kia kotahi rā, act in unity, tātou tātou e." So let's have a crack at singing it, shall we? Tu tira mai ngā iwi, tātou tātou e. Tu tira mai ngā iwi, tātou tātou e. Whai a te māramatanga, me te aroha, e ngā iwi, kia tapatahi, kia kotahira, tātou tātou e. Tātou tātou, puriti a ki a mau, hi au hi. Kia ora tātou.
A tēnā koutou, Ngāti Whātua iwi, Ngāti Whātua tangata, mā hui ki te rangi waka. Ngā uri o rātau, pērā ai a tumutumu whenua, whakatau, tupuriri, me api hai te kāwau. Tēnā koutou, Ngāti Whātua, i whakatau i a tātou nei i te atatu, Ai kore rawa e whakamotu ngā mihi ki au koutou, e whakaota ana i tō koutou reo, me te tikanga tuku mai i o ngā mātua tūpuna. Hoi anō, tēnā koutou. Ki te whānui, ko anō whea koutou, o runga i te whenui, rāra o ngā hau e whā mai i te toka tapu taino atu ki te pungo o te waka. Ko e ruarua aki nei ngā kupu, he nui ngā mihi ki au koutou, tēnā koutou. Ko waiau e mihi atu, he uri a hau no te tai tukarau, no ngā pui nui tonu. Kei te tai haua uru, ko te ramarua te maunga, ko te hika tū te hapu matua, kei te tai marangai, ko te kapawai te maunga, ko te kapo tai te hapu matua. Hoi anō, tēnā tātou katoa. I tēnei, I would just like to make my name is Dr. Rawiri Taonui. I'd just like to make a comment on the equality of tribes. I come from one of the more humble tribes, and I'd just like to point out that we were the first to adopt the Bible, and in doing so we gifted the country a common belief system. We were the first to sign Te Tiriti, and in doing so we gifted the country its first constitutional instrument. We are sorry about what happened afterwards. We were also the first to invade a Pākehā settlement, Kororāreka, today it's called Russell, and in doing so we created the process we now refer to as intercultural discourse. Hoi anō, tēnā tātou. Just before I go on, I'd just like to acknowledge some of our other communities. Mehe mea no Irama, assalamu alaikum, mahaba bikum, jumian, shukra alaikum. Mehe mea no Haina, ni hao, wenho wodapangyo, wangchang hao lai dao sitso fang zi. Ni hao ma, mehe mea no inihia, namaste, apa shwaga hei, namaskar meri doston. Mehe mea no roto i tu moana nui a kiwa, no hāmua, tolo whalava, e lelei lava ona wa'ai atu i au tau uma. Awhia mai matala mai ao i lēnei aso, i lēnei whale, tolo whalava. Mehe mea no tonga, mālo i lelei, talitali lelei ki hi whaleni, ki hi honi. No raro tonga, tūrau oro mai ki o rāna rā. A tātou i tei ngutu are, i tei ara. Uetahi atu, whakalofa lahi atu, Māori, Maori, and to everybody else, a warm hello. Go. So, I'm looking at the linkage between what the Royal Commission recommended in terms of Te Tiriti, diversity and preventing extremism. The green button is the button? Yes it is. Phew. My slides are all to run a line at a time push button, but I'm not too sure which one's the right one to do that here. Is there some assistance?
Ask your grandchildren.
Yeah. I see some people moving. So they're all the lines are run on, what do you call it? Yeah, but and then press and the line should come up.
Pardon?
Oh, same thing, is it?
Yeah, same button.
Same button. Okay. All right. Yep, no, that's good. Thank you. And I forgive you. Okay. Oh, no. Now, my second question is this device racist? Because obviously it worked for your thumb, but it's not quite working for mine. Okay. Oh, okay. My apologies, everyone. That was entirely my fault. Yeah, you guys. Cultural imperialism. Okay, so what did the Royal Commission say about what's happening? How are we going to prevent violence? Looking at the treaty, linking that to diversity, and so on. So. The Royal Commission noted the country is becoming super diverse. In the introduction, it said a large number of the public submissions said that a solution to preventing future extremism was to strengthen social cohesion. It made comments about the place of Te Tiriti of Waitangi and that over the last few decades that place has been increasing in a steady kind of a way. Making the link between Te Tiriti of Waitangi and social cohesion. Early in the report, the Royal Commission said that initiatives aimed at improving social cohesion must be founded on upholding Te Tiriti, and that required government action. Brackets linking Te Tiriti with social cohesion and our increasing diversity. The Royal Commission made 15 recommendations on social cohesion. None of the 15 recommendations included a reference to Te Tiriti, which is interesting. But even reading through all the 15 recommendations of the 72 explanatory paragraphs, subparagraphs, sections and subsections, none of them included the term Te Tiriti. And that's really, really interesting. In earlier sections, very bold statements about Te Tiriti, the link to social cohesion, but into the recommendations, essentially nothing. So we might reflect on why that occurs. Now, one of the things, and I noticed this because as part of my background, I've been consulting or advising on maybe six, 7 or 8, I think, of the strategies and policies that have evolved out of the Royal Commission report, and also I've got a background in consulting and advising in the policy area with other government departments. So one of the impediments to being bold in terms of linking Te Tiriti to social cohesion, prevention of violence, is that we have a limited understanding around the difference between the principles of the treaty and what I would refer to as ngā mātāpono or Te Tiriti. That is, the principles of the treaty in Pākehā and what we might call the principles of the treaty in English and the principles of Te Tiriti in Māori, and I'll explain that a bit later. This creates a challenge in projecting current treaty frameworks, so what we've lived with the last 20 years or so, into a vision of a super diverse, socially cohesive future. It's kind of like an invisible wall, a veil, something that we have to go beyond. Policies, by and large, when you read through them, they tend to separate Māori and diversity and the notion of diversity. So what we'll typically get is the treaty's really important, and then we don't say why. Then we say there's a treaty relationship with Māori, not much more, and then added to the end is that we are also a culturally diverse society. But there's no bringing together of those things, Māori and our new cultural communities. And that's it's a very unhelpful disconnect, because if we are trying to improve social cohesion, one of the things that we need to do is bring Māori and many of our new cultural communities together, because we share similar histories: colonisation, racism, violence, and those sorts of things. The last 2 years or so, being in conversations on this kaupapa, but also in terms of the National Anti-Racism Strategy, one of the things that comes up is a lot of our new cultural communities are looking to Māori for leadership, but the way we do policy doesn't facilitate that, it impedes it instead. And a reflection for ourselves as Māori, a lot of our new members of our new cultural communities are learning te reo, but very few of us are learning a bit of Arabic or Mandarin and things like that. But it's interesting. The policy framework doesn't allow that process to happen. Bringing Māori and new communities together is really important for bringing our wider community together. It's critical. A default position with these things is that typically what will happen is a report will say the treaty is really important, it's the foundation of this policy, full stop, and then it won't mention it again, and what you'll get is a series of what you might call uara Māori or mātauranga Māori or tikanga Māori, which are Māori values. And most often, in the majority of cases, unfortunately, those values have been put together by a Pākehā person inside a department, translating Pākehā concepts into te reo Māori using the online dictionary, often with quite unfortunate results. I was advising on one a few years ago, and it was in the education field, and I got sent this bunch of values and promoting the idea of curiosity to kids. And the word they'd picked is whakamatemate. And there was a bunch of others there. And of course, whakamatemate does mean to be curious, but it's the curiosity that precedes planning to harm someone or take their life, which is not kind of what you want going on in the playground. You know, and there are other problems like that. And that's not untypical. I was contacted last year, I think it was, about a national trust who had erected a signpost on one of our mountain ranges, and they received a formal complaint about the signpost. 10 names, you know, one of those posts that points to London and so on. It pointed to 10 Māori places, and they said, we received this complaint, and we're not very happy, you know, because it has to do with macrons, and, you know, Māori can't agree on those sort of things or anything like that. And my initial response was to write back immediately and say, there are 10 place names on this sign, and you've set a world record for spelling mistakes and macron mistakes on one post. Yeah, so it was a total of 30 over just 10 place names. Really, really big achievement, that. So what do we need? Well, one thing that we do need in the first instance is just greater understanding about the nature of the current relationship between Māori and the Crown, both in terms of the progress that we have made, but also in terms of some of the tensions which my colleagues have already spoken to. Now, we're not going to immediately resolve those things. They are in progress and they will proceed over time. I think we will eventually get to a really good place in terms of resolving those tensions, maybe in the next generation, something like that. But it's really important that you understand the nature of the tensions, so that when you're consulting with Māori, you understand that when you say treaty, or even if you say tiriti, how you think about it and how they think about it's actually quite different most of the time. The other thing we need is a treaty, a further evolvement of treaty frameworks that takes account of the idea of preventing extremism, and also one that goes to the issue of diversity, inclusivity, and all being part of Te Tiriti and the same country. And then the fourth thing we can do while we're embarking on that journey is we'll use uara Māori, so Māori values, but in the first instance, they should be derived from the context of Te Tiriti, diversity, and prevention of violence. It should be Te Tiriti based, not sort of based over here and then placed on top of Te Tiriti. They must evolve from Te Tiriti in those relationships. There are other people that have already done things like that, and some of the ones I'll show later come out of other policies. Now, I'll write a formal paper on this, but for the purposes of the PowerPoint, I haven't put in the references to avoid it being too complex. So looking at the current relationship, so the difference between the principles of the treaty and ngā mātāpono o Te Tiriti. I'll do that now. I've just put in two pictures of two of my favourite Māori philosophers, Eva Rickard, who was a wonderful woman, and the Honourable Hone Harawira from the far north, an amazing man. So the idea of the principles of the treaty, they're mainly derived from the text in English, and they've been laid down by the courts and also by government cabinets in 1993 and 2000. I actually went through the cabinet roster. So in the courts, no Māori in the High Court, Court of Appeal in those days. In the two cabinets that framed principles of Te Tiriti, there were 33 members from recall, of which during that time only about 5 or 6 were Māori. So basically the principles of the treaty reflect mainly a Pākehā view of the treaty. Most of you will be familiar with these things, the 3 Ps. So the principles of the treaty, as adhered to by the Crown, believe that there is a partnership with Māori, but it's an unequal partnership. The Crown has sovereignty, and Māori have something that is basically not more than self-management. The Crown's obligated to protect our interests, and we are to be included in processes of consultation and things like that. And that consultation, which is one of the sort of key issues that emerges out of the relationship as it's defined by the principles of the treaty. Consultation is often at short notice. The shortest notice I've ever had for a consultation with the Crown is listening to an announcement on the outcome of consultation with Māori at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 hours prior to the meeting beginning at 3 o'clock. Oh, that was very interesting. It's usually after the policy has been written. Most often occurs on a Thursday because Cabinet meets the following Tuesday. You know, that's not unusual. You might get 30 minutes to look at a document that's already been read, and then you've got to respond pretty much immediately. You don't have much time. So that is the nature of the current relationship. What we might term ngā mātāpono, the principles of Te Tiriti, which is really the Māori view of the treaty relationship. This is derived mainly from the text in Te Reo, tribunal reports, international law, and our experience of engagement with the Crown. And these are the sort of things that we've come up with over time. Rather than a partnership, brackets, that is unequal, Māori say we want an equitable, reciprocal, mutually beneficial partnership that results in tangible benefits, measurable benefits for our people, for our whānau, which is quite reasonable. Co-design, you know, if they're going to be policies about helping our communities, then we've got a lot of people that are quite expert in multiple areas, and they should be part of designing it, not just looking at what someone else came up with at the very end. And others, one of the issues you have is when you're being consulted is sometimes you get consulted by quite junior people, and then Bill referred to this, and then it goes back to more senior people and things change. Māori prefer rangitira ki te rangitira, decision maker to decision maker, and that's a much more effective kind of a process to have. We're into Māori, by Māori, for Māori, and co-governance obviously, and there's a big, you know, there's a new impetus, particularly in our younger generations, for Māori who want to see policy that's helpful for our people, but also helpful for wider New Zealand, including all communities, our new communities and communities before that. That's I did a review of the Māori Party campaign in the last election, and universally, when I spoke to younger members of the party, that was one of the things they all said. They want to see policies that are about building all of New Zealand. Yeah, very, very interesting, very encouraging. So, looking at some jumping ahead, that bit, you know, you just need to understand that's how it is, and it's constantly evolving, moving and shifting. We're not going to resolve it by the end of the year. It's going to work itself out at some time. I think probably in an international forum, but the important thing is when you're sitting there and negotiating with Māori, how they see Te Tiriti and how you see the treaty, even if you refer to it as Te Tiriti, is often quite different. So this bit is a model that we might come up with in terms of looking at a framework with Te Tiriti that takes account of preventing violence. So Article 1 of the treaty, Kāwanatanga represents the governance of the Crown. Article 2, Rangitiratanga, represents the self-determination of Māori. This created a partnership. We have different views on the partnership, but nevertheless it created a partnership. In terms of protecting our people and preventing violence, the partnership finds common ground in what on these are traditional terms, te whakahaumaru, that is keeping people safe, you know, protecting them from harm, and te whakaārai being an old word about a barrier, something that prevents bad outcomes. And following that, what we can say is the Crown has a specific duty to protect Māori and a wider responsibility to protect all members of our communities. Māori leaders carry a specific responsibility to look after the welfare of our community members, but it's also true to say that since the signing of the treaty, Māori have over and over again, many times, demonstrated a capacity to look after, support and protect other communities. The 1850s, most of our emerging cities relied on food produce from Māori communities. We had the first mills, we had the most coastal trading ships and all these sorts of things. Where I live at the moment, Palmerston North, Rangitane went across to the Whanganui River to prevent the fighting that was occurring there at the time, encroaching into the Pākehā settlements back in the Manawatu. You know, that's a kind of a factoid that's in the shadows of history these days. Of course, they were paid back. Within 30 years after the wars, they'd lost 90% of their land. And when the railway, I was reading a paper a couple of months ago, when the railway went through, Pākehā farmers were being paid compensation for the, Public Works Act for the land that went through, and a group of Māori approached the minister at the time and asked if they would get similar, and he said, no, you will pay for the right to have the train go through your land. So an interesting sort of relationship. So, and that goes up right through to today, Christchurch earthquakes, Whakaari Island, homelessness in Auckland and things like that. Māori have demonstrated they have that capacity. So, and then looking to the third article of the treaty, which we refer to today as Moderator, that includes the right to live in safety from harm, and also includes the right to, if you do suffer harm or property loss or those sorts of things, to have those restored to you. The second one is, and my last one is looking at Te Tiriti in terms of how it sits with the idea of diversity. So there is an earlier model that some of you would be aware of this. It divides pretty much all non-Māori into tangata tiriti. You know, that's how you came to the country, and it has Māori situated as tangata whenua. You know, that model's it served itself well. It was put together in 2006. Today, though, it probably is a bit simplistic, and one of the sort of some of the discourse that emerges is tangata whenua Māori agreed to give governance of the country to tangata tiriti, which kind of underscores Māori agencies as active actors during our history, and so that model needs to change a bit, and I'm looking at it I'm doing that in terms of looking at it in the context of diversity. So Māori are tangata whenua, people of the land, but we're also the first treaty peoples. Tangata tiriti tuatai. We're tangata whenua, Indigenous peoples. Tangata tiriti tuatai, the first treaty peoples through the signing of Te Whakaputunga in 1835, the Declaration of Independence. The first agreement between Māori and European power, signed in 1835 by about 50 chiefs. It's the first treaty document in our history, and through that mechanism, we're the first treaty peoples. Māori and Pākehā, we are the first treaty partners. Tokorua means partnership. In 1840, the signing of the treaty, we become the first treaty partners. And the way we can look at our new communities are tangata tiriti maha maha. So after the 1840s, we had new Indian communities, Chinese communities from the 1880s onwards. We had East European communities arrive after World War II. From the mid-80s onwards, our Asian community grew much larger, and then more recently we've had growth in our communities from Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, and so on. And these communities come here through the preamble of the treaty, which allowed settlers to arrive in Aotearoa. No one sort of figured out there would be that many, but it's what has happened, and that is how people have come into the country. So these communities are what you might refer to as tangata tiriti maha maha. And to pull all those things together, by the addition of those two augmented treaty frameworks, we're taking what we might call a Aotearoa katoa approach, a whole of New Zealand approach. We're trying to emphasise that in terms of social cohesion to prevent extremism, that we're emphasising the importance of everyone in the country seeing their place in Te Tiriti. No one higher, no one lower, everyone part of it. We are all tangata tiriti, we're all treaty peoples. We come to it along different pathways, but we're all on the same journey. We all belong here. We share a common, one of the goals the Royal Commission laid down was to develop a sense of nationhood. I'm saying that a new word like Aotearoatanga might be a useful augmentation in that area. The treaty encapsulates what we might call our tikano rautanga. This is a word that came out of the Kahikatea Māori Education Strategy 2021. It's a very old word that fell out of use, but it refers to things like, if you're standing on one side of a valley looking at a forest on the other side and it rains and then the rain breaks and the sun shines. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but the greens, each shade of green becomes more brilliant. And Kahikatea used that word as a word for diversity. I think it's really excellent. I think it's a really excellent word. And we might use a word like āwhitanga to emphasise being inclusive, inclusivity. A time when we are inclusive and tolerant is when we perceive, see and value our respective differences as just another source of strength. We may not always be able to explain exactly how that works, but then that's not what's required. All that's required is, as I know, these people have a different language. There's parts of that are really amazing. There's parts of it I'll never understand, but they probably think the same about me. And that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. We are on the same journey, and one of the things we want to do, and I think this is sometimes where the Royal Commission was limited, one of the things we want to be able to achieve is we don't need to know everything about every other culture. But what we do need to do is be respectful and to walk in their world and feel comfortable to do so even though we're not the one in charge. That's really important. I've got a Samoan wife with a great big family, and when we go to their events, I'm sort of peeling the galo and doing all that kind of stuff, and I just follow her along, and I'm very comfortable with that, And when we were in Te Ao Māori, we had a tangihana recently. My wife's a really amazing worker in that context. She's a leader in her own whānau, but she's a worker in my whānau and vice versa, and we're really comfortable with that. We walk quite easily in both of those worlds, and our kids are really comfortable with that as well. So in order to learn how to walk in each other's worlds, we need to keep walking towards Te Tiriti. That's a really important statement. Not everything's perfect, there are tensions, but we are heading in the right direction. There is no doubt about that, and we just need to keep walking in that direction. Hoi anō, my apologies for the technical team. Hoi anō, e te whare pūtoi, te whare kōkō, te whare kākā, nā haku noa, he mihi whānui, he mihi arohai, mihi atu anō ki a tātou, a tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora.
We've been nourished by the oratory of our Rangitira here. I tutored around with the questions and they went off screen. I've never got them back. And I want to just recognise what's been said. I think it's laid the po for the rest of the 2 days. We do see that question that Moana posed, that Te Huia posed in regards to, what Moana said to us, that the tiriti belongs to all of us, I think is something for us to hold on to. We won't go into a question sessions. We recognise we've gone over our time, but I hope that one in the reflections or in other spaces will find time to discuss the issues that have been said today. Kia ora tātou. It was the only way I could do it. I did tutu around with it.